Is this thing even working? God, my hands, they're like frozen, useless claws. My fingers, I can barely feel them. Testing. Audio log entry 001. My name is Adrian Vance. I was a glaciologist with the British Antarctic Survey. My work involved deep ice core sampling, understanding past climates, predicting future ones. Never thought I'd be living a slice of prehistory like this, recording this for anyone who might find it. When anyone finds it, the date, what was it, December 22nd, I think. Almost Christmas, some holiday. It was just hours ago, surely. Feels like an eternity, an absolute frozen eternity since it all ended. The roar, that unholy metallic shriek. It's still vibrating in the marrow of my bones, a ghost echo in the terrifying chaos of the present. It wasn't the familiar, comforting hum of the engines, the low thrum that promised stale coffee and recycled cabin air, and the eventual arrival at our tiny, isolated outpost. No, this was the sound of metal tearing, of air screaming in protest, a violent, ripping sound like 1,000 chainsaws attacking steel. It was the sound of our sanctuary, Flight 731, our precious lifeline across this desolate continent, surrendering to an unseen, unimaginable force. One moment I was drifting in that half-sleep common on long flights, a thin, scratchy blanket pulled up to my chin, staring out at the endless, serene white below. The familiar, sterile smell of aircraft cabin mingled with the faint scent of stale coffee and my own nervous anticipation for the research ahead. The next, the world outside the window was no longer serene. It was a dizzying blur of angry, malevolent white. Not clouds, not harmless snowfall, but something infinitely more menacing. A maelstrom. A swirling, suffocating, utterly consuming chaos that swallowed the plane whole. I remember the initial lurch, not a bump, not turbulence, not a gentle shift. This was a sudden, stomach-wrenching drop, a sickening plunge that sent unbuckled items, my well-worn paperback copy of Endurance, a half-empty thermos of tea, a colleague's laptop that had been precariously balanced on the seatback tray, tumbling down the aisle like panicked rats fleeing a sinking ship. The scent of spilled coffee was quickly overwhelmed by something acrid, sharp, metallic. Then the alarms began, a piercing, relentless shriek that cut through the cabin's growing murmur, each pulse a hammer blow to my eardrums. And above it, a woman's voice, the flight attendant. Her tone was unnervingly calm, almost robotic, but beneath it I could detect the faintest tremor of pure terror. Brace for impact, head down, hands overhead. Her words were a mantra, hollow and terrifying. My hands, without conscious thought, instinctively clamped onto the armrests, knuckles white, digging into the hard plastic, preparing for something unknowable. The lights flickered, plunged into darkness, then flickered on again, casting grotesque, dancing shadows. Looking back, it felt like an eternity, a slow-motion descent into oblivion, every second stretching into a minute. But it must have been mere seconds. The plane, our precious metal bird, was being ripped apart. A blizzard, unlike any forecast, had materialized out of nowhere, a furious, blinding white wall of wind and ice that swallowed us whole, shook us like a child's forgotten toy. The cause? We'd been told there was a low-pressure system forming, nothing unusual for the Antarctic summer. Standard operating procedure. Mild turbulence expected. But this was different. Catastrophically different. A sudden, unforecasted polar vortex intensification, an extreme shift in the persistent, large-scale low-pressure zone that usually hovers over the poles, locking in the coldest air. And what made it truly catastrophic was its conjunction with a rare atmospheric river, a narrow, concentrated band of moisture that had somehow channeled itself down from warmer latitudes, injecting an unimaginable amount of water vapor into the supercooled polar air. The combination was lethal. We were caught in a perfect storm, a meteorological anomaly that defied all conventional forecasting models, the kind of event that happens once in a century, if that. I'd studied historical climate data, seen reconstructions of such events, but never believed I'd be living one. The sheer, brutal force of the wind shear, the difference in wind speed and direction over a relatively short distance in the atmosphere, must have been astronomical. Later analyses, if anyone ever gets to them, will likely put it well over 200 knots, possibly more. It didn't just buffet us, it literally ripped through the airframe, compromising the structural integrity of the wings with the force of 1,000,000 sledgehammers. The vibrations were deafening, sickening, vibrating through my very teeth. One moment we were flying, a tiny, vulnerable metal bird against an endless white canvas. The next, we were falling, spiraling. The impact wasn't a single clean hit, not like in the movies where everything goes quiet. It was a chaotic, grinding series of violent collisions. The fuselage buckled, groaned like a dying beast, then splintered apart with a sound that still echoes in my ears, a sound of total, absolute destruction. I felt a searing pain, a sharp crack against my temple, a sudden blinding flash of white behind my eyes, and then a merciful, absolute darkness. Consciousness returned in ragged, painful bursts, like a faulty generator sputtering to life in a prolonged power outage. The first sensation, overwhelming, immediate, was cold. Not just chilly, not the crisp bite of a winter morning that invigorates you. This was an all-encompassing, bone-aching, suffocating cold that seeped into every pore, through my thick parka, through my multiple layers of thermals, through my gloves, through my very bones. It was a physical presence, a weight, pressing down, threatening to crush me. My eyes fluttered open to a scene of absolute devastation. Twisted metal, shattered seats, wiring hanging like frozen spaghetti, sharp shards of composite material everywhere, and the unsettling, profound silence of a world muffled by deep, fresh snow. The air was thick with the metallic tang of jet fuel, sharp and acrid, mingling with the fresh, icy cleanness of the polar air. The roar of the blizzard was still there, but now it was an external, omnipresent growl, a beast circling its prey, its hot breath a frigid gale tearing at the remnants of our world. My own breath, each painful gasp, plumed thick and white, a visible testament to the frigid air I was inhaling. I was pinned. My left leg was trapped beneath a section of crumpled, twisted wreckage. Seemed like part of the overhead locker structure fused with a seat frame. The sharp, hot pain, a deep throb that resonated up my spine, told me something was very, very wrong. A white-hot spear of agony. Panic, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, clawed its way up my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the frozen silence. But then, a strange, almost clinical clarity settled in, a detachment I've often heard survivalists describe. This wasn't a nightmare I could wake from. This was real. And by some miracle, some cosmic fluke of twisted metal and a slightly shifted angle, I was alive. For now. The immediate priority, even before the full weight of my situation hit me, was assessment. My head throbbed, a steady, dull ache behind my right temple, but no obvious bleeding that I could feel through my numbing scalp. My right arm felt bruised and stiff but functional. The left leg, however, was completely immobilized, crushed beneath the debris. I tried to shift, to pull it free, but the effort sent a fresh wave of agony through me, so intense it made me grunt, a guttural sound I barely recognized as my own. It wasn't moving. The metal was too heavy, too firmly embedded. I remembered the flight crew's safety briefing, the one they always gave, the one you always half listened to, eyes glazing over as they pointed to emergency exits and oxygen masks, eager for the flight to be over. The flight attendant's voice, clipped and professional. In extreme cold environments, the first 30 minutes are critical. Assess injuries, secure immediate shelter, and conserve body heat. Hypothermia sets in rapidly. She'd said that. I'd probably been scrolling through my phone. Now those words were my only instruction manual, my only lifeline to sanity. My brain, despite the pain and the cold, latched onto that. Assess, shelter, conserve. It was a mantra, a desperate prayer. My breath plumed violently in the frigid air, each exhalation a ghostly cloud, a stark, visceral reminder of the punishing temperature. It had to be well below minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, perhaps even colder with the relentless wind chill. Exposed skin would suffer frostbite rapidly. Frostbite, for those who don't know, isn't just your skin getting cold. It occurs when tissue actually freezes. Ice crystals form within your cells, damaging them, disrupting blood flow, and essentially suffocating the tissue. It starts with numbness and a waxy, pale appearance, progressing to blistering, and in the worst cases, tissue death and gangrene. Hypothermia, the dangerous lowering of the body's core temperature, was an even more immediate, insidious threat. Our bodies are constantly producing heat through metabolism, but in this kind of extreme cold, the rate of heat loss through conduction, contact with cold surfaces, convection, wind blowing heat away, radiation, body heat radiating outwards, and evaporation from sweat or wet clothes can easily outstrip the rate of heat production. This leads to a cascade of symptoms: uncontrollable shivering, then paradoxical undressing as confusion sets in, slurred speech, lethargy, impaired judgment, and eventually loss of consciousness and death. The body tries to protect its core by constricting blood vessels in the extremities, sacrificing fingers and toes to keep the brain and heart warm. A brutal but effective survival mechanism for the short term, but ultimately futile in prolonged extreme exposure. I scanned my surroundings, my eyes stinging from the biting wind, blurring with a mixture of pain and cold. The plane had broken into several large sections. I was in what appeared to be the forward cargo hold, surrounded by scattered crates marked with scientific equipment labels and unidentifiable debris. Miraculously, a large section of the fuselage, perhaps 20 feet long and remarkably intact on one side, lay just a few yards away, offering a potential, albeit temporary, refuge from the relentless wind. The blizzard howled, a constant, physical presence that vibrated through the very ground beneath me, a deep guttural growl that promised further devastation. Visibility was almost zero, a swirling vortex of white, a phenomenon we call a whiteout. This is incredibly dangerous because the light from the sun or sky scatters uniformly off the snow, eliminating all visual cues. You lose all sense of horizon, depth perception, and direction. Up is down, ground is sky. It's utterly disorienting. I was lost in a world of pure, featureless white, a terrifying, claustrophobic expanse. My thoughts, fragmented and numb, drifted to the others. The pilot, Captain Miller, the co-pilot, the flight attendant, the 3 researchers from the Belgian expedition I'd shared bad coffee with just hours earlier, their faces blurry in my memory, their cheerful banter about the upcoming field season. Were there any others? I hadn't seen anyone else move. The silence, when the wind momentarily lulled, was unnerving, a profound stillness broken only by my ragged gasps and the distant, monstrous moan of the storm. I called out, my voice thin and reedy, raw from the cold, swallowed almost instantly by the roar. "Hello? Is anyone there? Can anyone hear me?" Only the wind answered, a mocking, desolate moan that echoed my despair. The dread began to set in, a cold, creeping certainty that I was utterly alone, adrift in this frozen hell. The pain in my leg intensified, a throbbing, searing reminder of my predicament. It was a deep, burning ache that radiated up into my hip. I needed to get out from under this debris. With a surge of pure primal adrenaline, a desperate instinct for survival that overrode even the blinding pain, I pushed and pulled, gritting my teeth so hard my jaw ached. The metal was heavy, unyielding, fused to the frozen ground, embedded in the snow. My fingers, already stiffening and clumsy, fumbled for something, anything, to leverage it. My eyes landed on a sturdy-looking metal bar, likely a part of the cargo restraint system, thick and unbent by the impact. It was cold, so cold it burned to touch. With desperate strength, a strength I didn't know I possessed, I wedged it under the edge of the wreckage and heaved, my muscles screaming in protest, tendons straining. The metal groaned, a sickening protest of stressed alloys, then shifted with an ear-splitting screech. With a final agonizing pull, a jolt that sent blinding pain through my entire body, a shock wave that rattled my teeth, my leg came free. I cried out, a guttural sound, a mix of pain and profound, dizzying relief. My breath fogged violently, a cloud of agony. The leg, my left shin, was clearly broken. It was bent at an unnatural angle, the skin stretched taut and discolored, an angry red blooming beneath the gray pallor of my skin. A wave of nausea, cold and clammy, washed over me. I clamped my mouth shut, fighting the urge to vomit, tasting blood from where I'd bitten down hard on my lip. I had to get to that fuselage section. Crawling, agonizing as it would be, seemed the only option. Every movement was excruciating, dragging myself over the jagged edges of debris, the frozen ground, the loose snow. But the primal, undeniable urge to survive propelled me forward. I used my right arm, digging my elbow into the snow, dragging my good leg, pulling myself inch by painful inch over the uneven, snow-covered wreckage. The wind tore at me, throwing icy needles against my exposed face, freezing the tears that involuntarily streamed down my cheeks. My fingers, even inside my thick gloves, were losing all sensation, turning into clumsy, unresponsive lumps. As I painstakingly crawled, my eyes, desperate for anything useful, scanned the immediate vicinity. Through the swirling white, I spotted a small, dark object half buried in the fresh snow. My backpack. My God, my backpack. It had been strapped to the seat in front of me, somehow thrown clear but intact enough to hold its contents. My lifeline. Inside, I knew, were the few essentials I always carried on these flights, a force of habit born from years in the field. A compact first aid kit, a small, space blanket-style emergency tarp, a multi-tool, and a handful of high-energy bars. Reaching it felt like an Olympic feat. Every inch a monumental struggle against the cold and the pain, but I finally managed to drag it closer, pulling it by a strap with my good hand. My hands, numb and clumsy with cold and the tremors of pain, fumbled with the zipper. The first aid kit. I pulled out a roll of medical tape, some gauze, and a small splinting kit. Thankful for my obsessive habit of over-preparing, of always considering worst-case scenarios, a trait that had often earned me teasing from colleagues, but now felt like a divine gift. I knew I needed to immobilize this leg immediately. Movement would only worsen the fracture and increase the pain, draining my already limited energy, risking further internal damage, perhaps severing arteries or nerves. Always splint a suspected fracture, I rasped into the recorder. My voice thin, almost a whisper against the wind, forcing myself to articulate the knowledge. It reduces pain, prevents further tissue damage, and makes movement, however painful, more manageable, crucial for conserving energy and preventing shock. Use whatever rigid materials you have, branches, rolled-up magazines, or in this case, emergency splinting materials. Pat it well to prevent pressure sores, especially in cold. The goal is to keep the injured part from moving at all. Fashioning a makeshift splint on my leg with the limited resources, the blinding pain, and my numb, uncooperative fingers was a hellish task. The cold made my muscles seize. The pain was a white-hot spear, but I forced myself to focus. I used the splinting materials and wrapped it as tightly as I dared, grunting with each pull of the tape, making sure it was firm but not cutting off circulation. The relief, though minimal, was immediate, a slight dulling of the incessant throb, a fraction of the pressure easing. It wouldn't let me walk, but it might let me crawl without passing out. It took me another 20 minutes, an eternity in the biting cold, to reach the relative shelter of the fuselage section. It was battered, certainly, an aluminum shell ripped open like a tin can, jagged edges protruding like broken teeth, but one side offered a crucial barrier against the direct assault of the wind. Snow had drifted heavily inside through the numerous gashes, creating mounds and valleys of pristine white. Inside it was still freezing, make no mistake, a bone-chilling below -20 degrees Fahrenheit at least, but the immediate suffocating bite of the wind chill was significantly reduced. I slumped against a crumpled seat, my body shaking uncontrollably, every muscle in revolt, a violent, desperate shiver. This was not just physical cold, it was the chill of utter desolation, of being utterly alone against the vast, indifferent might of the Antarctic. The silence inside was heavy, oppressive, broken only by my ragged breathing, the violent shivers that racked my frame, and the distant, constant howl of the storm outside. It was a primeval sound, a world without human warmth. I was in the belly of the beast, a fragile, injured human amidst the grotesque wreckage of modern technology. My only companions were the chilling ghosts of what had been and the unyielding, frigid embrace of the polar wasteland. The clock was ticking, a silent, relentless countdown against my dwindling body heat. Every minute was precious, every calorie burned irreversible, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the true struggle had only just begun. The dread was a palpable entity, a cold hand tightening its grip around my heart, threatening to squeeze the last warmth out of me. I pulled out the emergency blanket, a thin, crinkly metallic sheet, and wrapped it around myself, a meager, almost pathetic defense against the encroaching death. My teeth chattered so hard I thought they'd crack, producing only muffled, indistinct sounds. This was only the beginning of my ordeal in the white hell. The light outside was fading, though in a whiteout, it was hard to tell dusk from day. The temperature would undoubtedly drop even further as true night approached, if it hadn't already. This was a place designed to kill, and it was doing its best to succeed. Audio log, entry 002, Adrian Vance, still here, still alive, though I'm not entirely sure why or for how long. The blizzard, it hasn't broken, not yet. Inside this wreckage, this splintered shell of aluminum, it's marginally better, a windbreak, that's all it is. But it's something, my leg, it's a throbbing inferno. I can feel the swelling, the bone protesting with every beat of my heart, and the cold, the insidious, relentless cold. It's a physical thing. It's a pressure. It's inside me now, deeper than my clothes, deeper than my skin. It's trying to squeeze the life out of me. After the initial brutal shock of the crash, that chaotic, horrifying symphony of metal and screaming air, a different kind of horror began to set in. The profound, absolute silence. It was the loudest sound imaginable. Not a single cough, not a groan, no cries for help from anyone else. My own screams in the immediate aftermath had been swallowed by the roaring wind, my voice raw and thin, calling out for anyone, anything. Nothing. Just the vast, empty, howling expanse. The wind was the only voice, and it spoke of desolation, of finality. The sheer isolation of it all gnawed at me, a relentless, gnawing beast in my mind. This isn't just cold, you see. The Antarctic isn't just an environment of extreme temperature. It's a psychological battleground. Your mind starts to play tricks. Every distant creak of straining metal in the wreckage, every shifting drift of snow against the fuselage becomes a sound, a whisper, a step, a fleeting shadow in the periphery of your vision. Paranoia, a cold, unwelcome companion, began to settle in. Was I truly alone? Or were there others, injured and silenced by the same unforgiving landscape, perhaps close enough to offer aid, but hidden by the whiteout, by the snow, by the very debris that surrounded me? The uncertainty was a torment, worse than any physical pain, because it gnawed at the last vestiges of hope. My immediate focus shifted from the external chaos to the internal. My body was screaming. The leg was an agony, a constant burning throb that pulsed in rhythm with my aching temples. I could almost feel the bone grating when I inadvertently shifted, a horrifying sensation that made me clench my jaw, tasting blood where I'd bitten down too hard. My hands and feet, despite the thick gloves and insulated boots, were already numb, a chilling sign of encroaching frost nip, the precursor to full-blown frostbite. The numbness was like pins and needles, then a dull ache, then nothing at all. It was unsettling, the feeling of my own flesh becoming alien, disconnected. My core temperature was undoubtedly dropping. This was the critical phase of mild hypothermia. I was shivering violently, uncontrollably, my whole body convulsing in a frantic, desperate attempt to generate heat. My coordination was already impaired. Simple tasks, like fumbling with the zipper on my backpack, felt like complex engineering problems. My fingers like clumsy sausages, thick and unresponsive. Recognize the early signs of hypothermia, I mumbled into the recorder, my voice slurred, but the need to document, to articulate, still strong. Uncontrollable shivering is the first, most obvious sign. Then comes confusion, slurred speech, clumsy movements. It's your body crying for help. To combat this, you have to prioritize insulating yourself from the ground. It leaches heat rapidly through conduction. Cold draws heat directly from your body if you're in direct contact, much faster than air does. Use anything available, broken seats, insulation foam, even a compacted layer of snow, to create a barrier between your body and the frozen surface. Get off the ice, get off the metal. I was thankful for my years of field training, for the seemingly endless lectures on cold weather survival drilled into us during induction at the Rothera research station. It felt like a lifetime ago, a different world entirely, but the knowledge was ingrained, a desperate lifeline in the storm. I managed to pull out my emergency space blanket. It's a thin, crinkly sheet of mylar, shiny silver on one side, bright orange on the other. It works by reflecting up to 90% of your radiated body heat back to you, trapping it. It's not much, no thick down sleeping bag designed for the poles, but it's something. I wrapped it tightly around myself, pulling my knees to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible to reduce my exposed surface area. This posture, the fetal position, is crucial for heat retention. It minimizes the surface area exposed to the cold and protects the vital organs, heart, lungs, brain. I also found my spare wool socks and pulled them over my existing ones, creating an extra layer. Layering is key in cold environments. It traps air, which is a poor conductor of heat, between the layers, providing additional insulation. It's the trapped, still air that keeps you warm, not just the fabric itself. Every single piece of fabric, every bit of foam, was now a precious asset in this desperate battle. The multi-tool in my pack was a godsend. Its small, sharp knife felt like a surgical instrument in my clumsy, freezing fingers. I used it to carefully cut away some of the damaged fabric from a fallen seat cushion. The foam inside, though meager and ripped, offered a thin layer of insulation to sit on, keeping me off the direct freezing metal floor of the fuselage. Every little bit helped. Every single calorie saved, every degree of heat retained, was a tiny victory against the encroaching death. I knew I had perhaps an hour, maybe two at most, before my core temperature dropped dangerously low and I slipped into moderate hypothermia, where rational thought becomes impossible, where decisions are clouded by delirium, where the will to fight begins to falter. The clock was ticking, a silent, internal countdown that felt more pressing than any deadline I'd ever faced. My mind, however, wouldn't stay still. As a glaciologist, I've spent years studying this environment, but always from a safe, controlled distance, from the warmth of a research station or the heated cabin of a snowmobile. I've read countless accounts of polar expeditions gone wrong. The Franklin expedition, lost in the Arctic, their fate shrouded in mystery for decades. Men succumbing to starvation, lid poisoning, and the relentless cold. Shackleton's epic survival in the Antarctic, a testament to sheer human will against impossible odds. But even he lost men to the cold and privation. Their bodies never truly warmed again. These stories, once academic subjects, dry facts in textbooks, now flooded my mind with vivid, terrifying detail. They felt immediate, personal. My own research outpost, Gamma 7, was what? 200 miles northeast? 200 miles of featureless, frozen waste. Too far to walk with a broken leg. Even if I knew the direction in this blinding whiteout, even if my body wasn't already betraying me, turning into a block of ice. The psychological toll was immense. The sheer scale of the disaster, the absolute silence from any other human, combined with the relentless, unfeeling cold, started to erode my resolve. A profound loneliness, deeper than any I'd ever known, settled in. It was a suffocating blanket, heavier than the snow outside, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I thought of my family back home, my sister, Eleanor, always worried, always sending care packages. My nephews, little Leo and Maya, their bright faces laughing during video calls. Would they ever know what happened? Would they wait endlessly, hoping for a rescue that would never come, a final, crushing blow? The thought brought a fresh wave of despair, a crushing weight, but also a flicker of anger, a spark of pure, desperate defiance. I wasn't going to just lie here and die, not without a fight, not without leaving some trace. This recording, it was my defiance. My refusal to be forgotten, to be swallowed by this monstrous white emptiness. It was my last stand, my voice against the void, a desperate whisper into the hurricane. I needed water, or rather I needed to avoid dehydration. In extreme cold, people often forget the importance of hydration because they don't feel thirsty in the same way as in hot climates. But the body loses a lot of moisture through respiration. Every visible breath plume is essentially water vapor leaving your lungs, hundreds of milliliters over hours. It's an invisible drain. Dehydration can impair judgment, accelerate hypothermia, and worsen frostbite. It thickens your blood, making circulation less efficient, further compromising your body's ability to generate and distribute warmth. I had a half-frozen bottle of water, a plastic one from the flight, but it was just that, half-frozen, a solid block of ice at the bottom. I broke off some ice from it and held it under my armpit, inside my parka, trying to melt it with body heat. It was painfully slow, a frustratingly futile effort. My body's warmth seemed barely enough to sustain itself, let alone melt ice. Stay hydrated, even in the cold, I stressed into the recorder, the words coming out as a shaky whisper, each one an effort. Melted snow or ice is essential. Avoid eating plain snow directly. It drastically lowers your core body temperature as your body expends precious energy to melt it, energy you absolutely cannot spare. Melt it first, ideally with a heat source, or at least in a container against your body. Small sips are better than large gulps, to avoid shocking your system. Warm fluids are best, but any fluid is better than none. I knew this. I knew all of this. But knowing and doing were two different things when every movement was agony and every thought a struggle against the creeping fog in my brain. My mind was like a half-frozen hard drive, sputtering, struggling to access information. My eyes scanned the interior of the fuselage section. Debris was everywhere. Bags, equipment, personal effects. The cabin had been a chaotic mess of human lives, now reduced to discarded fragments, scattered like forgotten toys. I spotted something small, metallic, glinting through a tear in a seat cover, almost mocking me with its reflection. A small portable radio, one of the emergency beacons issued to polar researchers. My heart leaped. Hope, a fragile, desperate thing, surged through me, a tiny ember in the overwhelming cold, threatening to ignite into a wildfire. But it was out of reach, stuck beneath a tangle of seatbelts and twisted metal, a few feet away. and the pain in my leg prevented me from reaching it easily, from even crawling towards it without significant effort and a fresh wave of agony. It was so close, yet impossibly far, a cruel trick of fate. The thought of food was distant, secondary to warmth and the aching throb of my leg. But I knew I needed calories to fuel my shivering body, to generate heat. The body burns calories at an accelerated rate in cold stress, just to maintain core temperature, often thousands more than normal. I managed to pull out one of the high-energy bars from my backpack. It was frozen solid, like a brick. I broke off a small piece with difficulty, chipping at it with my numb fingers, and slowly, painstakingly chewed it. The taste was bland, like frozen cardboard, but the act of eating, of putting something into my system, felt like a victory, however small. It was a reaffirmation of life, a defiant act against the elements. As the minutes crawled into what felt like hours, the reality of my predicament became starker, sharper. I was injured, isolated, and in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. The blizzard showed no signs of letting up, its mournful howl a constant, maddening companion. The light outside was fading, though in a whiteout it was hard to tell dusk from day, the sky a seamless, featureless sheet of gray, a blanket of perpetual twilight. The temperature would undoubtedly drop even further as true night approached, if it hadn't already. This was a place designed to kill, and it was doing its best to succeed. My mind drifted to a specific memory, a personal conflict I'd tried to bury, a conversation that now played on an endless loop in my head. My last argument with my mentor, Dr. Anya Sharma. She'd warned me about taking this flight, about the increasingly unpredictable weather patterns this late in the season. Her voice, usually calm and logical, had been uncharacteristically agitated. "Adrian, the models are showing anomalies. It's not worth the risk. Postpone the flight." I had dismissed her concerns, my own stubborn desire to get to Gamma 7 and complete my research before the winter lockout overriding her seasoned wisdom. "The data is crucial, Anya," I'd argued, my voice sharp with frustration. "We can't afford delays. This research could be groundbreaking." My ambition, my academic drive, that relentless, singular pursuit of scientific discovery above all else, had put me here. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth, colder than the air itself. My personal flaw, my single-mindedness, had become my undoing. The guilt was a heavy weight, pressing down on me, almost as heavy as the wreckage I'd been under. The silence outside, when the wind momentarily softened, was punctuated only by the creak of the straining metal around me. It sounded like a giant organism groaning in pain, a mechanical beast slowly succumbing. Or maybe, I thought, it was the sound of the ice itself, expanding, contracting, shifting, a living, breathing entity beneath the surface, a primordial groan. The eerie atmosphere was palpable. Every shadow, every distorted shape of wreckage seemed to hold a lurking presence. The sheer emptiness of the polar landscape can play havoc with your mind, conjuring illusions, twisting reality. I found myself staring at a crumpled section of fuselage, the fractured edge of a window opening, convinced I saw a face in the distorted metal, grinning, leering at my predicament, a skeletal visage of despair. My heart hammered, not from exertion, but from a primal fear that had nothing to do with the cold. Hallucinations were a terrifying sign of extreme stress, of impending collapse, of the brain starting to fail. I had to fight it. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, forcing the image away. "Focus, Adrian, focus." The physical pain was a constant, blinding presence, but it was almost a comfort compared to the psychological torment. It grounded me, reminded me I was still alive, still tangible. The cold, however, was insidious. It dulled the pain, a terrifying numbness that promised worse to come. I could feel my extremities, my fingers and toes, losing sensation, the blood flow constricting. I needed to move them, to fight the frostbite. I wiggled my toes inside my boots, forced my fingers to clench and unclench, even though it sent agonizing sparks of pain through the stiff joints. It felt like moving someone else's limbs, a puppet on a string, disconnected from my core. The skin was waxy, pale. I knew this was bad. If you feel numbness in your extremities, especially fingers and toes, I forced out, my voice weaker now, you're probably experiencing frostnip or early frostbite. Don't rub them with snow. Don't rub them vigorously at all. That can cause crystal damage. Gently warm the affected area with body heat, tucking hands under armpits, placing feet on a warm abdomen, or use slightly warmer but not hot water if available. Don't expose them to extreme heat too quickly. It can cause further damage. The key is slow, gentle rewarming, and get medical attention as soon as humanly possible. The words felt hollow, a desperate lecture to myself. Medical attention was a fantasy, a distant dream in this frozen hell. Hours stretched, defined only by the deepening cold and the mounting fatigue. My eyes burned. My eyelids felt heavy, desperate to close, to surrender to the warmth that seemed to beckon from the darkness. I kept telling myself just another 5 minutes, then another 5, then another. This, I knew, was a crucial battle. To surrender to sleep was to surrender to death. My body was begging for rest, muscles screaming, brain fading, but my mind, what was left of it, refused. I pinched myself hard. The pain was dull, distant, but enough to shock me awake for another few precious seconds. Then, just as the deepest cold set in, I started to feel warm. A pleasant, almost comforting warmth spreading through my extremities, a tingling sensation in my numb fingers and toes. It was so deceptive. This is the final deadly trick of severe hypothermia, often called paradoxical undressing. As the brain struggles starved of oxygen and heat, it can malfunction, causing blood vessels near the skin surface to dilate, leading to a false sensation of warmth. Victims sometimes begin to shed their clothes, which rapidly accelerates heat loss and leads to death. It's a cruel, insidious trap. I recognized the symptom from my training, a chilling warning that my body was on the very edge of collapse. I forced myself to stay wrapped in the space blanket, to pull my parka tighter, to fight against the insidious feeling. Do not give in, Adrian. Do not let it trick you. It's a lie. You are dying. The internal struggle was immense. The urge to just be warm, to simply rest, was overwhelming. I can hear something. Outside, a different sound, not the wind. Or maybe it is. My ears, they're ringing. Hard to tell. My head, it's so heavy, so foggy. But there's a flicker of light, or is it my imagination? The brain playing tricks. Always tricks. It's the cold. It's making me hallucinate. Is it a rescue beacon, or just the end? Just as despair threatened to consume me entirely, just as the white fog in my mind began to thicken and blur the lines of reality, a flicker of something, barely perceptible through the swirling white outside, caught my eye. Not a solid light, but a diffuse, almost ethereal glow, like a distant star struggling to pierce a dense fog. My first thought was another hallucination. My mind was breaking, the cold finally winning. But then, it seemed to pulse, faintly rhythmic, a soft, regular beat against the chaos. Could it be a searchlight, or was it just a trick of the light, the snow reflecting some unseen source, creating some kind of cruel mirage, a last, false hope? The hope, fragile and dangerous, surged through me, a desperate, irrational warmth in my chest, battling the cold. It was enough to make me struggle, to try and move closer to the torn opening in the fuselage, to peer out into the blinding, unforgiving white. Every ounce of my remaining strength, every ounce of my will was focused on that distant, phantom glow. The very act of straining, of focusing on that elusive light, seemed to clear my mind, if only for a moment. The survival instinct, dormant for hours under the crushing weight of injury and despair, roared back to life with a vengeance, a primal scream of defiance. I was still Adrian Vance. I was still alive. And there, against all odds, was a glimmer, a chance. Even if it was just a final delusion before the end, I had to reach for it. My only hope, however slim, however impossible it seemed in this vast, indifferent wilderness, lay in that fragile, impossible light. The eerie silence of the wasteland seemed to hold its breath, waiting for me to fail, waiting for me to give up. But I wouldn't. Not yet. Not while there was even the faintest possibility. Audio log entry 003. Adrian Vance, I'm still here. God help me. It's been, 12 hours, 15. The sun, I think it's still out there somewhere. This whiteout, it's endless. The cold, it's inside me now, in my bones. My core temperature, it's dropping. I can feel it. Everything is so slow, so heavy. I need to keep talking, keep recording for them, for anyone, to know what happened here, what is happening. The hours since the crash have blurred into an indistinguishable, agonizing stretch of time. My initial shivering, violent and uncontrollable, has given way to a deep internal cold that feels like it's freezing my very organs. This is a terrifying progression. The body, as it enters moderate to severe hypothermia, actually stops shivering. It's a trick, a horrifying sign that the body's thermoregulatory mechanisms are failing. It means your core temperature has dropped significantly, probably below 90 degrees Fahrenheit. My muscles feel rigid, stiff as planks of frozen wood, my movements clumsy and uncoordinated. I tried to shift position earlier to ease the pressure on my broken leg, and it felt like I was moving through thick syrup, every muscle screaming in protest, disconnected from my will. My speech, I can hear it now, is slurred, my thoughts disjointed, like a broken radio tuning in and out. I'm fighting the profound, overwhelming urge to just close my eyes, to sleep. This is the deadliest trap in hypothermia, the false sense of warmth, the seductive lure of unconsciousness that promises relief but delivers only death. I've been trying to keep my mind active, to perform mental exercises, anything to stave off the creeping confusion. I tried to recall the quadratic formula. I recited the names of the ice cores I'd analyzed, their depths, the atmospheric composition from each layer. I mentally listed the capitals of every country I could remember. Anything. But the words kept slipping away, replaced by fragmented images, distorted memories. The face of my sister, Eleanor, worried, her brow furrowed. Dr. Sharma, her glasses pushed up her nose, her finger tapping a weather map, her stern but kind expression. These vivid hallucinations, or perhaps just feverish dreams, are part of the brain's desperate response to oxygen deprivation caused by the cold, a terrifying descent into delirium. They feel so real. The dread has morphed into something more profound, more unsettling, an eerie resignation. The vastness of this place, the sheer indifference of the frozen wasteland, makes you feel utterly insignificant. A tiny speck, a forgotten statistic, erased by the snow. This is not just a struggle for survival against the elements. It's a battle against the overwhelming psychological burden of hopelessness. The silence, when the wind occasionally dies down to a mournful sigh, is the most terrifying sound of all. It's the sound of absolute emptiness, of a world without life, without hope, a cosmic void. I found myself humming, just to break it, anything to push back the silence. My only contact with reality is the pain in my leg, a constant, searing anchor in a sea of unreality. I tried to inspect it again, but my fingers are too stiff, too numb to properly manipulate the splint or feel the skin. The skin around my fingers and toes feels waxy, almost dead. Frostbite is setting in, I know it. The extremities are the first to go. The body sacrifices them to protect the core. I flexed my fingers, trying to force blood into them, to feel something, anything, but the feeling was diminished, alien. It was like they belonged to someone else. If you feel numbness in your extremities, especially fingers and toes, I forced out, my voice weaker now, a raw whisper. You're probably experiencing frost nip or early frostbite. Do not rub them with snow. Do not rub them vigorously at all. That can cause further tissue damage due to ice crystals scraping against cells. Gently warm the affected area with body heat, tucking hands under armpits, placing feet on a warm abdomen, or use slightly warmer, but not hot, water if available. Don't expose them to extreme heat too quickly. It can cause a sudden, agonizing influx of blood to damaged tissue, which makes it worse. The key is slow, gentle rewarming, and get medical attention as soon as humanly possible. The words felt hollow, a desperate lecture to myself. Medical attention was a fantasy, a distant dream in this frozen hell. My only medical attention was my own failing body and what little I had in my pack. I've been searching the wreckage around me, desperate for anything useful, any scrap of survival gear. I found a few more items scattered nearby. A small, insulated lunch bag, miraculously still somewhat intact, perhaps from one of the pilots. Inside, a half-eaten sandwich, frozen solid like a rock, and a packet of instant coffee. The coffee was useless without hot water, but the sandwich, calories, precious fuel. I gnawed on a piece, my teeth aching from the cold, the effort monumental. The taste was bland, like frozen cardboard, but the act of eating, of putting something into my system, felt like a victory, however small. Every calorie was precious. The body burns through its reserves at an alarming rate just to maintain a basic core temperature in these conditions. I also found a small broken flashlight. The glass was shattered, but the battery compartment seemed intact. With fumbling fingers, I clicked the button, a weak, flickering beam, barely perceptible in the dim, whiteout gloom. But it was light, a tiny beacon in the endless darkness. This small victory, this tiny flicker of human ingenuity against the overwhelming odds, offered a momentary surge of purpose. It was enough to dispel some of the shadows, literal and metaphorical, that had been creeping into my mind. It helped me confirm the time on my watch, which was still working, a marvel of modern engineering. It's been 8 hours since the crash. 8 hours. It felt like 2 days, a lifetime compressed into agony. The plane itself, our coffin, was now my sanctuary. I had to fortify it. The wind was still finding its way in through various cracks and tears in the fuselage, whistling through them like malicious spirits. I used crumpled seat cushions, pieces of torn fabric, strips of insulation foam, anything I could find to stuff into the larger openings, trying to block the insidious drafts. It was slow, agonizing work with my numb hands and broken leg. Every time I shifted, a fresh wave of pain brought tears to my eyes, but I pushed through it. This was my tomb, or my temporary fortress. I had to make it habitable. Sealing off drafts reduces heat loss through convection, the transfer of heat by the movement of fluid, in this case, bitterly cold air blowing over my body. Every small reduction in heat loss was a gain. The most harrowing part of this ordeal is the constant nagging doubt. Is anyone coming? Did the distress beacon activate? Did anyone even know we went down? The sheer isolation is the most potent weapon of this environment. It strips away everything but the raw will to survive. You start to question your own sanity. I found myself talking to the wreckage, to the empty seats, to the recording device, just to hear another voice, even if it was my own. My voice, rasping and strained, was my only company. A strange phenomenon occurred then. As the deepest cold set in, I started to feel warm. A pleasant, almost comforting warmth spreading through my extremities, a tingling sensation in my numb fingers and toes. It was so deceptive. This is the final deadly trick of severe hypothermia, often called paradoxical undressing. As the brain struggles, starved of oxygen and heat, it can malfunction, causing blood vessels near the skin's surface to dilate, leading to a false sensation of warmth. Victims sometimes begin to shed their clothes, which rapidly accelerates heat loss and leads to death. It's It's a cruel, insidious trap, a final, lethal seduction. I recognized the symptom from my training, a chilling warning that my body was on the very edge of collapse. I forced myself to stay wrapped in the space blanket, to pull my parka tighter, to fight against the insidious feeling. Do not give in, Adrian. Do not let it trick you. It's a lie. You are dying. The internal struggle was immense. The urge to just be warm, to simply rest, to finally stop fighting was overwhelming. My vision, already dim, began to tunnel. The edges of my perception grew dark, closing in. My hearing became muffled, as if submerged in water. It was the physical manifestation of my body shutting down. I could feel my breathing becoming even more shallow, my heart rate slowing. This was it. This was the end. I had fought, I had tried, but the Antarctic, it always wins. The thought was a chilling whisper, a final, insidious voice in my head. Then, just as despair threatened to consume me entirely, just as the white fog in my mind began to thicken and blur the lines of reality, a flicker of something, barely perceptible through the swirling white outside, caught my eye. It was outside, through one of the larger gashes in the fuselage wall, where a panel had ripped away, leaving a jagged opening. Not a solid light, but a diffuse, almost ethereal glow, like a distant star struggling to pierce a dense fog. My first thought was another hallucination. My mind was breaking, the cold finally winning. But then it seemed to pulse, faintly, rhythmic. A soft, regular beat against the chaos of the storm. A disciplined, deliberate pattern. Could it be a searchlight? Or was it just a trick of the light, the snow reflecting some unseen source, creating some kind of cruel mirage, a last false hope before the final darkness? The hope, fragile and dangerous, surged through me, a desperate, irrational warmth in my chest, battling the cold. It was enough to make me struggle, to try and move closer to the torn opening, to peer out into the blinding, unforgiving white. Every ounce of my remaining strength, every ounce of my will was focused on that distant phantom glow. My mind, which had been so fractured, so close to succumbing to the cold, suddenly snapped back into a sharper, albeit still pained focus. The survival instinct, dormant for hours under the crushing weight of injury and despair, roared back to life with a vengeance, a primal scream of defiance against the approaching void. I pushed my body forward, ignoring the agony in my leg, the numbness in my extremities. The jagged metal edges of the fuselage scraped against my parka, but I barely felt it. The light, it was there. Faint, distant, but undeniably there. And it was moving, slowly, systematically. It wasn't the wild random glow of a snow mirage. This was purposeful. My heart, sluggish from the cold, began to pound with a desperate, frantic rhythm. Someone was out there. A frantic thought. The emergency radio I had seen earlier. The one stuck under the wreckage. Could I reach it? Could I activate it? It was a long shot. It was too far for me to crawl with a broken leg in my current state. Panic, no longer cold and clinical, but hot and desperate, flared. I couldn't move. Not quickly enough. The light was still so far away, barely a pinprick. What if it passed by? What if they didn't see the wreckage through the whiteout? The chances were infinitesimally small. The overwhelming vastness of this place, the sheer statistical improbability of being found. I forced myself to breathe, to control the rising panic. Maintain situational awareness, I whispered, the words coming out as a strained gasp. Even when your body is failing, you must try to think. Don't waste energy on panic. Focus on the next actionable step. My brain, against all odds, offered a solution. My backpack. I'd pulled it close when I splinted my leg. Inside was the multi-tool, and inside that, a small, polished reflective surface, the back of a tiny mirror. It was tiny, useless for signaling from miles away. But what if they were closer than I thought? What if they were scanning? My numb fingers fumbled, desperately searching. The multi-tool. I pulled it out, the metal icy cold against my bare palm where my glove had slipped. With clumsy movements, I extracted the tiny mirror. My hand was shaking so violently I could barely hold it steady. I aimed it at the pinprick of light, trying to catch its beam, to reflect it back. It felt pathetic, a desperate, futile gesture from a dying man. But I had to try. I angled it, tilting my wrist, trying to create even the tiniest flash. The whiteout made it almost impossible to see my own reflection, let alone aim accurately. I just pointed it in the direction of the light, hoping some stray reflection, some glint, would pierce the veil of snow. The light pulsed again, stronger this time. Or was it just my deteriorating vision, my mind desperately clinging to hope? No, it was closer, marginally. The rhythmic beat of its appearance seemed to grow clearer, a slow sweep. It was a search pattern. They were looking... I was Adrian Vance. I was still alive. And there, against all odds, was a glimmer, a chance. Even if it was just a final delusion before the end, I had to reach for it. My only hope, slim, however impossible it seemed in this vast, indifferent wilderness, lay in that fragile, impossible light. The eerie silence of the wasteland seemed to hold its breath, waiting for me to fail, waiting for me to give up. But I wouldn't. Not yet. Not while there was even the faintest possibility. My teeth chattered so hard it was painful, but the thought of that light, that faint, distant promise, fueled a last, desperate surge of adrenaline. I kept the mirror held high, a trembling, almost invisible signal against the overwhelming white. This was my last gamble. Thanks for tuning in. If this narrative pulled you into its depths, consider giving the video a like. Your support is how these stories get told. And if you're ready for more chilling, plausible adventures, make sure you subscribe and join our growing community of explorers. What will we uncover next?